The year is 991 AD, on the coast of Malden, England. From within the mist, those accursed dragon-headed ships emerge. Those on the shore watch the arrivals with fearful eyes. Everyone assumes swords will be drawn, and the scene will turn into a bloodbath. But the expected does not happen. The Viking leader Olaf, disembarking from the ship, does not reach for his sword. He walks onto the beach with the ease of a merchant. Looking directly into the English commander's eyes, Olaf asks, "Why are you dying?" and makes this most extraordinary offer in history. "Give us your silver, and we will board our ships and leave. For the cost of gold is lighter than the cost of blood." This offer, which seemed ordinary at the moment, was actually an officially issued invoice, a service fee. In movies and at school, they always described Vikings to you as thoughtless barbarians screaming Valhalla and chopping off heads. Actually, the pure truth is not exactly this. The men before you are not just warriors, but the smartest risk management experts history has ever seen. Welcome. Today I will explain to you that dirty order established by the Vikings, the Danegeld. Put the men with axes aside. Let's focus on the essence of the event. That is, the scent of money. The Vikings were actually insurers, but the policy they sold was slightly different, a non-aggression guarantee. What they went and said to kings was this: "Your city is very beautiful. It would be a shame if it burned. Pay up and let us protect it." You remember this system from somewhere, don't you? Yes, this is actually exactly the protection racket used by the modern mafia. And who will they protect you from? From themselves, of course. In other words, they are monetizing the threat they created. That is, the Vikings used violence not as the main objective, but as a tool to increase the bargaining power of the tribute they would receive. Burning and destroying has been a preferred method since the earliest periods of history. But in a way, this is actually killing the goose that lays the golden egg. However, the Vikings' management is different. They focus on emptying the vault with the threat of burning. So for them, England is not a battlefield, but merely a massive, fat cow to be milked. And unfortunately, they found a king facing them who was very eager to play this game. Now let's go to the palace, to King Æthelred the Unready of England. His nickname, meaning ill-advised, poorly counselled, or making wrong decisions, summarizes the man's vision in a way. The king looks at the map, sweats, and turns to the accountants and advisors beside him, asking, "What shall we do?" For those around the table, the calculation is quite frightening. The death of thousands of soldiers, the burning of fields, and the collapse of the economy. In summary, the cost is colossal. What do the Vikings want? Just £10,000 of silver, a very limited price compared to the cost of war. The request facilitates the decision-making of the king and his men. And they make that ill-fated decision. Let's just pay it. It is cheaper than fighting. We call this logic, this miscalculation in history, Danegeld, that is, the Danish tax. According to King Æthelred and his men, the deal they made was brilliant. They had purchased peace and saved their country. Finally, they immediately filled the chests and carried the silver to the shore. The Vikings took the money and moved away from the coast. When they disappeared on the horizon, everyone, along with the king, took a deep breath. But no one knew, or even thought, that those who left would return in the near future. When a year had passed, the Vikings had finished the money. Guess what happened next? Naturally, the time had come for the Vikings to return. But this time, they were not alone. They had brought their cousins, friends, and neighbors too. Because everyone was of the mindset that there is such a king in England who distributes money without fighting. When King Æthelred and those beside him asked the arrivals in shock, "Didn't we have an agreement?" the Vikings laughed. The answer was quite chilling. That was last year's price. This time, they wanted 16,000, not 10,000. When they came the following year, they would want 24,000, then 48,000. You see the requested price of peace, don't you? The numbers seem to have gone mad. The most savage rule of economics had now come into play. If you pay, demand increases. As demand increases, the price rises. That famous poem by Rudyard Kipling strikes our face like a slap. If you pay the Danegeld, you never get rid of the Dane. This was no longer a peace treaty. This was a subscription system. England was no longer an independent country. It was the Vikings' ATM. Now wipe the dragon-headed ships, shields, and axes from your mind and replace them with the symbols of the modern world. Fiber optic cables, data centers, logistics networks instead of ports, and the systems that keep your daily life afloat. Whatever the coast of Malden was in 991, power lines, trade routes, and digital infrastructures are exactly that today. Because there is an unchanging truth. Power, in every age, belongs to the one who controls the vital arteries. The Vikings came to the ports because trade was there. Today, pressure is directed at oil pipelines, straits, and financial centers. The method has changed. The actors have changed. But the relationship between threat and money has remained exactly the same. Attacking a state or society directly is expensive, risky, and the consequences are uncontrollable. But delivering the message, "I can cause damage," to the right place, forces the other side to the table. Danegeld is not a Viking invention. It is the oldest and most profitable power strategy in history. No one abandoned this method after the Vikings. It was merely made more complex. In the Middle Ages, cities made payments to pirates. Trade routes were tied to tributes, and kings signed silent agreements. Because for rulers, short-term tranquility was more attractive than long-term independence. In some border regions of the Ottoman Empire, raiders were sought to be silenced by giving money. In Europe, city-states made deals with mercenary armies. The logic was always the same. Let's pay now. We'll look at the rest later. But in history, the times called later always arrived, and the subsequent price always rose. Danegeld was not just a money transfer. This was actually an unspoken habit for both sides. And what provided the habit was fear. A power that learns that frightening you works will repeat it. That is why tributes do not end wars. They magnify the destruction and the suffering to be endured of the war being avoided. Actually, the main issue here is not Vikings or kings, but the weaknesses hidden in human existence. And a ruler under fear mostly places the cost calculation ahead of morality and the future. It is exactly at this point that the economy of individuals or countries ceases to be a tool of defense and transforms into a tool of surrender. Because money is both an element of power, which is like a weapon, but sometimes it does not protect you, and it makes you a target. Money made England look weak because it had become the means of escaping fear. And to the Vikings, Maintaining the fear was more important than the war itself. That is why history writes about some societies, not because they were rich, but because they made the threat expensive. Because do not forget, the real issue is not whether the attack happens, but whether the attack is logical. However, history has not always written that everything remained the same either. Exactly in this cycle, a completely different figure who changed his habits was about to enter the stage. Indeed, in the 9th century, King Alfred of Wessex faced the same threat that the English encountered. The Vikings offered King Alfred that simple but dangerous proposal too: pay and we will leave. But Alfred was smart enough to read from history the mistake King Æthelred made. Alfred understood this. If you make a payment once, you are no longer the one negotiating. You become the one paying. Therefore, he invested the money not in the Vikings, but in defense, in the people, and in time. He built fortresses called burhs. These were designed not just as stone walls, but as a strategic network. When the Vikings came ashore, they could not find supplies. Staying on the coast and organizing attacks was becoming expensive. Alfred, of course, did not win every battle, but he succeeded in making every attack illogical. And after a while, the Vikings realized this. This is not a place to make easy money like England. Alfred's success was not military, it was economic. In other words, Alfred had raised the cost of the threat. Actually, this rule applies today. That is, deterrence is provided not by weapons, but by the system established with those weapons. In short, making the attack not impossible, but making that attack meaningless is an art. This is why states protect power lines, straits, and trade routes today. Companies invest in infrastructure for this reason, and societies try to become resilient to crises using this method. Because the money spent on defense is always cheaper than the money going to tribute. While Aethelred was trying to buy peace, he had actually lost his independence. Alfred, on the other hand, had built peace and succeeded in keeping his country standing. The difference was a perspective of time rather than pure courage. Of course, we need to view every event in history as a lesson for our own lives. So ask yourself, which problems are you brushing aside by staying silent, paying up, or making do? And which ones cost you more each time? Do not forget, Danegeld is not paid only with silver. Sometimes it is paid with honor, sometimes with time, and sometimes with freedom. Every act of tyranny you remain silent about takes both a note and courage to come back again. Because fear is also an emotion that is rewarded, and like every emotion, it grows when it is rewarded. History teaches us this. Problems are not solved when postponed. On the contrary, they take root. Paying a price is sometimes inevitable, but who you pay the price to changes everything. It should not be forgotten that a price paid without fighting is not a solution. For this reason, history keeps a record not only of the winners, but also of those who do not bow down. And you now know that real power is not financing fear. You know that real security is not your money, but where you stand. You know that what hides postponed attacks behind it is not peace. You know that raising your walls is hard work, but freedom is not cheap either. And now you know. Those who choose the easy way pay. Those who choose the hard way write.